to school, back to school, to prove to Dad that I'm not a fool. I got my lunch packed up, my boots tied tight. I hope I don't get in a fight. Oh, back to school, back to school.
Hey, it's Nick from Print Profit. We are doing a book review, let's go the right way, a book that's over 100 years old, and you need to watch this video twofold. Number one, if you're a printing company and you like profitability, which I sure hope you do, this is a great way to better understand where we came from as an industry when it comes to critical topics like job costing, coming up with selling prices, and hopefully making a profit. Reason number two, it's a kick in the butt. Because the same way we run our businesses today in our modern printing companies with our modern technology, it has not changed since the early 1900s from when this book was written. So let's jump in. Let's introduce our new friend, Roy. He was a prominent figure in the printing industry in the early 1900s. He was the go-to guy for cost findings and cost accounting. And he wrote a lot of well-known publications. The most famous, from my background check on old Roy, was the Franklin Printing Catalog, which is a pretty significant contribution. So this would become the standard reference for pricing in the printing industry. So why did Roy spend part of his life in the early 20s writing a book called Estimating Hints for Printing? Well, very, very clear. This is his words, not mine. And this guy's hilarious. He's spicy. He packs a punch. Ask any 10 printers the cost or the selling price of any piece of printing, and you will secure 10 answers, no two of which are apt to be alike.
I like it a lot.
Kind of similar to today's world. It was the wild, wild west. It was crazy for the printing companies. It was crazy for the customers who would want to do business with them. So Roy, being a lover of math, cost accounting, which is a modern cutting edge thing in the early 1900s, he says there's got to be a better standard way versus just having no rules. Heretofore, there has been no general rule or application of averages or statistics, which would enable all printers to arrive at anywhere near the same result or the same class of work. And what he was doing at the time was a bit of a revolution, right? He's saying a new day is dawning. So let us get out of the old rut, adopt the newer methods, cast off our old know-it-all ideas, resolve to shorten methods, and get down to a solid understanding of the mathematics underlying the trade and business we have chosen. He wants to put together a rhyme and reason of how we as an industry can be smarter and more methodical for our selling prices. A lot of this book is just that. He is providing a framework for printing companies at the time, and I want to be gentle with these pages, using primarily hourly rates, which is the exact same way we do it today in the industry, to calculate costs, to come up with prices that hopefully give us a profit. But there's this standard rhyme and reason, and that's what he's pushing for here. Roy talks a lot about it in this book, and I love the analogy of a recipe book, okay? He's providing averages, structure, but at the end of the day, each printing company should build their own recipe book from it and adjust accordingly. And this is a big change in the way that estimates were done, and he's poking fun again, right? The cultivation of the memory is commendable, except when it comes to giving a price on a piece of printing. Then memory should be put in the background, and either a price list or schedule, a scale or table should be used. Now, how often do we see in our printing companies there's one person who's the gatekeeper of pricing. We don't know how that person comes up with the price, but they do. That person wins the lottery or doesn't look both ways and a bus comes by, the company's going to be in trouble. That's the same thing Roy's talking about in the early 1900s. The worst condition that can prevail in any printing office is when but one person only is capable of making a price, and that solely by reason of such person possesses all the available office data and records. By insisting that all salesmen or estimators in the same establishment who make prices shall use the same recipes, fairly uniform results will be obtained. Love it. It's the same challenge that we know today, and Roy's saying by following these rates, these guides, it will help standardize that process. The hourly rates that we know today, this is what our software is built off of. He makes clear that, man, this is the modern way, developed through a cost-finding system, to find out what it costs for each productive hour in each department of a printing plant. This cost per hour is going to bear every so-called overhead burden and, in addition, a margin for profit. Same way we do it today, wanting to take all the fixed overhead costs in the business and in a very arbitrary, unknown way, which Roy uses those same words in the book, arbitrary, we put it to an hourly rate, and through that use, there should be a profit. Now, what's interesting in the book, he doesn't say how these rates were calculated, and he calls himself out on it. There's no need here of explaining how this is done. Many accountants will supply such information for a reasonable sum. Sort of similar what I've noticed around the world today in the industry. If you go to any printing company and ask about their rates, when was it last updated, who updated it, crickets, not very clear. And one thing that I see very clear is even if you do have these rates, even if you try to do it the right way, often the market will not bear the selling prices that it leads to. And then you're just going to kill that whole exercise of updating your rates and massage it accordingly. It's the same thing in the early 1900s. Same thing. The typical race to the bottom when it comes to pricing is something that we've seen, over the history of our industry. And that's something that even in the early 20s, Roy talks a lot about. Without tables scientifically figured out, the best estimator in the world will shave his assumed price when estimating a job for which the customer awaits a price. And it's worthwhile listening to this. At a recent convention of printers, someone pointed out this weakness of estimators as a class. When a man came to me for a price on some work, the printer said, I would figure and keep cutting down before I gave a price, for I saw a mental picture of my competitor giving a lower price than that. Then, after I had cut it 2 or 3 times by eliminating the cost of the ink and reducing the time it was calculated the composer must make to set the work, I would, with the greatest hesitation and fear, tell him the price would be about so much. Then, when he told me it was fearfully high and that he could get it cheaper over at the other shop, I would immediately tell him I would go figure it over again and off go another 5 or 10%. That confession was good for the soul. You will no doubt admit that. If so, take a solemn oath with this brother printer to never again and assist of this old hit and miss, mostly miss way of giving a price. Fish out the recipe book, Roy is saying, and from it make a fair price and stick to it. How awesome that what he is saying in the early 1900s holds exactly true over 100 years later. The tables themselves, Roy's talking about in this book, would not amount to but little if the reader cannot be convinced that it is better to use such tables than to continue to guess or to quote prices offhand. Printers have too long been making prices out of their heads. So the race to the bottom pressure, cutting it because of competitors. And he's saying we need to stand on these tables, stand on these mathematics, these statistics, and stick to our guns if we want to make a profit. And that's what I want to get across with this book review. I've got plenty of notes from the book provided, but this took me a lot of preparation to read it numerous times to film this video, and I hope you got value out of it. Looking at how in the early 1900s, coming up with these hourly rates, it was really introduced, just to recap, to want to bring standardization, to have something that we can give prices on intelligently, right? We can go back and defend why we came up with that price. And generally speaking, I really thought his approach was solid, wanting to have these hourly rates for the right reasons, have each printer build their recipe books and adjust it accordingly. But I will say, when it comes to these hourly rates, we understand why the industry has historically used them, because we're in custom manufacturing, and every customer is unique, much less the printed products that they're asking for. So we need some type of quick, standardized way to try to make an intelligent selling price. But what I see very clearly today as practices in the industry, it's just the same in the early 20s. Nowhere in the book is he being clear about how these rates were created and the exact profit that the job's giving. This is a bit of a mystery, something that's not well understood. And I can say that with confidence around the world. We don't clearly understand how the hourly rates are created. And then even if we do follow that recipe of how to try to correctly calculate our rates, often the market is not going to bear the selling prices that come out of those rates. So we mess up the rates and massage them. And it's the same thing he's talking about here with these recipes and adjusting accordingly. So my big thing with hourly rates is they don't represent true costs. It's very much accounting fiction. Roy, in his own words, even talks about how it's arbitrary, how we take these overhead costs and try to put them in a job. For me, the application of hourly rates in print, it's just a way to come up with the selling price. But if you follow it religiously, which the whole industry does, that's how our software, our management information systems, that's how it's built off of. The profit that these systems say that each job is generating, there's a lot of accounting fiction in the costs, and that profit that's left over, there's a lot of elements where it's a mirage. It's not real, because we've taken all of these overhead costs and we've tried to sprinkle it in the job, and that's misleading. So the better way, the different ways of thinking, just like the nature of what Roy's tried to do here in the early 1900s, that's for another video. But I think it's been one incredible journey, seeing clearly the history of the industry, and I think Roy did a really good job in the early 1900s of wanting to modernize and advance, try to get away from the wild, wild west, and have a more standardized, calculated, methodical way. And we should all be grateful. His works were significant, and thanks for sticking around for our first ever book review. There's a lot more to come.